and share with us a few things about the great experience that some of our young people and parents had at Lads to Leaders convention last weekend. So I'll look forward to hearing a few more things from Brent. Isn't it always interesting when Brent does the announcements? It's always just, it's interesting. I tell you what, I love him. I love him. Also, one other announcement. May the 26th, I believe it is, Saturday, May 26th, we have our VBS planned, our one-day VBS. We've been doing that for several years now. We're going to be having sign-ups for that. Now, you all know we can have a good vacation Bible school with a lot of good help. And if you're not going to help Norman with recreation, I just, nominated you to head up recreation, Norman. Or if you're not going to, I don't know who does crafts. I'm not for sure who does all that. Or our Bible class teachers or helpers, we need a lot of help. So hope you can help us out on that, and that we can get a lot of good young people here, and hopefully a lot of young people from the community as we strive to reach out to them. You know, it was 2,700 years ago that the prophet Isaiah, that he penned through inspiration what Nelson read for us a few minutes ago. And isn't that a beautiful passage, Isaiah 53? I mean, you read that. Not only are you just, amazed by the predictive prophecy, by the prophet looking being inspired of the Holy Spirit, looking 700 years into the future and writing down what was going to happen. But then you read that and you think, this is what Jesus did for us. Well, in that same day, Isaiah the prophet had a lot to say about a lot of the sin problems in his time. A lot of things he said could be directly applied to 21st century America. You recall the verse where Isaiah said, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." When I was a kid, one of the things that Dad, I don't know if you ever heard me say this, but I came as close to hating or detesting as anything you had in the house. And it was a big bottle of Clorox that he had. It was a big bottle of Clorox, gallon size or so, and I didn't like it because we had, I grew up in a 3-bedroom house, much bigger and better than I deserved, I'll tell you that. My mom had the bathroom that was about 700 square feet, and Dad and the boys, all the boys, we shared about a 32 square foot, maybe a 16 square foot bathroom. And it always was the messier one. You had 4 boys or 3 boys and Dad in this little cubby hole of a closet thing, and then I was thankful for it though. And then, it just got messier, a lot dirtier. Well, what did the old country boy, Cliff Lyons, how did he clean up messes? I don't know when Clorox came about, but I just know that my dad, he kept a big bottle around. And probably about every week or two, it was like, okay, boys, let's get that shower Cloroxed. And so we would have to Clorox the shower. And have you ever breathed Clorox? I don't recommend it, okay? Because after being around it for about 15 seconds, I felt like I was going to die, especially in an enclosed shower. And so I grew to detest the smell of it. And I realized some people might kind of like it because it is a disinfectant, right? Kills germs. I guess that part is good if it doesn't kill you first, as you try to use it. And so I'd like to share with you just for a moment this morning something about my big bottle of Clorox bleach up here. My Clorox bleach. Maybe you can all see this right here. If God, as increasingly more people, sadly, in this country tell us that He's just a figment of our imagination, then this sweet gallon. In Alabama, you could probably sell this for $100. The sweet gallon of Milo's sweet tea. Let me tell you what I did love growing up. I drank sweet tea like my kids drink water. And they drink a lot of water. And I probably should have been drinking a lot of water, and my mom worked a lot, so she didn't know how much sweet tea I drank necessarily, even though she made a lot of it. I love sweet tea. I would come in from outside playing and I wanted sweet tea. I would eat supper, and even though she would make me drink a glass of milk first, I wanted sweet tea. We would go out to eat, and if they had sweet tea, I'd want sweet tea if we could afford sweet tea. I love sweet tea. Now, I stopped drinking as much sweet tea because I realized as I got older, the more sweet tea I drank, the more pounds I gained. I think there are a lot of people in Alabama that we gain weight just by drinking sweet tea. We don't even really care about desserts as long, if you have sweet tea in Alabama, you don't really need dessert, right? I love sweet tea. If God is just a figment of our imagination, then this sweet bottle, this sweet gallon of Milo sweet tea, which, by the way, if you come to the fellowship meal today, this will be there. Then this is just a bottle of Clorox that I detest the smell of, and I think most people probably do. If the Bible is a mere man-made book, written by uninspired men, or maybe as a lot of people say, well, it's a good book, but it's not God's book. It's a fair book. It's an okay book. Then this is my bottle of Clorox and tastes just as sweet. If Jesus Christ is not the Son of God, this is our bottle of Clorox and tastes just as sweet. If the church is merely a social group, that we can kind of have half-hearted participation with, and we think that God is pleased with that, then this is my bottle of Clorox, and you can just chug it. If parents who care about their kids and discipline their kids on a regular basis and do so promptly when they need it, as the Proverbs writer says, if that's being mean and hateful, then this is our bottle, not of tea, sweet, Milo's tea, but just a bottle of Clorox that tastes just as bitter and toxic. If preaching grace, which has always been the way that man has been saved. Noah, before he was saved by building the ark, found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And it was from that grace that God revealed to Noah that I'll save you if you build a big boat and do what I tell you to do. We're saved by grace through faith, not of ourselves. God's scheme of redemption was divinely given. It was divinely prompted. He knew He was going to save man through the blood of Jesus Christ before the church was ever established, before the world was ever created. Is that divinely initiated or man-made? That's divinely initiated. Now, man responds to that grace, and by the way, if preaching grace is just soft-soaking the message, then this is my bottle of Clorox. On the other hand, if saying that being obedient is extremely important, and if obedience is what a lot of people who are not religious and some people who claim to be Christians, if that's legalism, if stressing the need to be obedient to Christ is legalism, then this is our bottle of Clorox and tastes just as toxic and bitter. If meekness is weakness, if being submissive is being a sissy, if caring enough about children and unborn children to call attention to the fact that I can't imagine there being a more bigger, sadder blight on society than the slaying of approximately 1 million unborn children a year. If that makes me a misogynist, if that makes Christians misogynists because we care about the unborn, there's something wrong with that. Go back to the beginning of that list for just a moment. By the way, let me also say, I really love what Gary said a few moments ago. Appreciate all the... I love coming to worship. One of the things I love about worship is being led in worship by men who love the Lord. And as you've seen this morning, by older men and by younger men. who love the Lord. I love what Gary said a few moments ago about our giving. The less we think that this is mine and the more we think that this is all from God, it's going to be a whole lot easier to give God what's rightfully His. You know, if being giving and if being evangelistic, if that's being cultish, if that's being a religious freak, then this is our bottle of Clorox and tastes just as toxic, or it is just as toxic. I mean, think at the beginning of that list for just a moment. I would just like for us to understand this point before we move on, and that is, if God, you know, we live in a day where 1 out of every 5 Americans claims no religion. And most of those would be either atheist, agnostics, probably the largest group. They don't really know if there's a God or not. They don't really say He doesn't exist, but they're not really sure. Or skeptics. You know, we live in a day where fewer people believe in God. Should it surprise us in a day when fewer people believe there is a God or don't really know if there is, and fewer people are convinced that the Bible is the Word of God, and fewer people are reading the Bible? 46% of Americans are non-Bible readers. 61% of millennials, according to a survey done just a few years ago, are non-Bible readers. Does it surprise us that we are living in times that seem to be, in our country's history, more characteristic of the day and time in which Isaiah lived than ever before in our country's history, it seems? I mean, there's always been bad stuff, a variety of evil things that have taken place in our country's history. But you want to talk about just a mix-up of things. Is it surprising, though, when so many people are mixed up about good and evil, calling evil good and good evil, when really the two foundational platforms of morality are the existence of God and the fact that the Bible is His revealed will to us to tell us what to do, to tell us how to think. It is not in man, Jeremiah said, to direct his own steps. You see, let me just read you some statements from some unbelievers and who said that, you know, they don't believe in God. Richard Dawkins, Peter Payne, 2005, an atheistic philosopher from several decades ago, Jean-Paul Sartre. They said that if there is no God, then anything goes. Richard Dawkins, probably the world's most well-known atheist, said, "This universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good." Is it surprising that there's so much confusion in the world about good and evil if there seem to be an increasing number of people who don't believe that there is such a thing as good and evil because they don't believe that there is a God? Peter Payne said in a 2005 debate on Does Ethics Require God? Dan Barker said this in his debate with Peter Payne. He says, "There is not an action that is right or wrong. You cannot say that any action is either right or wrong." Why? Because there is no God. Jean-Paul Sartre said very simply, "Everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist." You see, you can't have good without God. You can't have objective good and objective evil where it can be said, okay, I not only feel like that's good or bad, I know that's good or I know that's bad. There is no reference point if there is not a reference point outside of a human being or outside of this physical world in which we live. Caleb Colley, who wrote an article for us several years ago at Apologetics Press, some of you know Caleb, good Christian man. He preaches down in Florida right now. He said, good is defined by God's goodness, which is inseparable from His nature. His standard of goodness applies to all mankind by virtue of creation. If there is no God, there is no such thing as good and evil. There is just what you think is best compared to what I think is best. What you think might be good or bad versus what I think is good or bad. And we would not be able to say really who is right or who is wrong. Some might say, well, it's good or bad based upon how many people it affects. Well, who gets to say that's the case? It's good or bad based upon, what 51% of the world votes on as is good or bad. Well, what if 51% of the world or 99% of the world said that killing babies, unborn children, is good? Or that committing sexual immorality is good? Or that abusing people or murdering people out of cold blood is good? In his debate with Dan Barker a few years ago, you recall, those of you who saw it, that Kyle Butt, my colleague, he asked Dan Barker about this statement and said, when would rape ever be good? Give us an example. And he actually gave us an example. It was a far out example, but atheists believe in aliens. And he said, well, if an alien came to Earth and said, this needs to take place or we're going to destroy Earth. That sounds pretty far out to Christians, but again, atheists believe that they're aliens, and some of them believe that aliens are the ones who put life on Earth. Isn't it something they've never seen an alien, and they'd be more likely to believe an alien put life on this planet than an all-knowing, all-powerful God did. You cannot have goodness, you cannot have a standard of morality without God. If parents who discipline their children are doing something that's, I read in the standard book. You see, God is the standard of morality. And the only way we could know that, I would say in part we can know something about good and bad in the God-given way we were created in the image of God. It seems like to me there's something about our consciences that could tell us that there is such a thing as good and evil, surely. But to get more specific about actions that are good, that are bad, that are right, or that are wrong, well, we have to have some kind of revelation from God. And isn't it interesting that so many things that God tells us, that parents who discipline their children, that's a good thing if they do it the right way. Now, I realize there are parents who abuse children, and they're totally wrong about that. Just like you might say there are people today who have guns and they misuse them. Does that mean that guns are evil or that people who have them are evil? There's a lot said about that today. Yeah, people misuse all sorts of things. And people misuse their freedoms that God gives them and all of us. But that doesn't make obedience bad. It doesn't make disciplining children bad. The Proverbs writer said, actually, he who spares the rod hates his son. We don't discipline our children? I tell you what, sometimes I wonder if the kids around here need much discipline because they're such good kids. Did someone say, I don't know about that? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But one reason why I think we have such great children here is because they're from good families. And why do they generally behave so well? Because their moms and dads have taught them. Oh, that's a blessing. And our mothers and fathers here, you should be commended for that. I mean, you look out at the world today, and you see those of you, a lot of you are in school systems, and you see all sorts of things. You're in communities where you're like, whoa, what in the world? And coming to be a part of this group gathering and Bible studies and worship, oh, it's a breath of fresh air. Why is that the case? Because goodness flows from God's very nature. And He's revealed to us what is good. And the closer that we are to that goodness, and the more that we talk about it, and the more that we care about it, then we're never going to call something like this a big gallon of Clorox. This is what it is, one of the greatest tasting fluids on the planet, right? Well, maybe I overstated that a lot. Maybe not. In Isaiah chapter 5, just go back to Isaiah for just a moment. Go back to Isaiah chapter 1. In Isaiah's day, Isaiah chapter 1, now he was living in a time of moral decline, especially when King Ahaz, that's the father of Hezekiah, verse 1, you see him mentioned there after Uzziah, Jotham. Ahaz, the time of Ahaz was a terrible time to be living in Judah. In fact, the inspired writer of Chronicles, probably Ezra, he said that this was a time of moral decline. Isaiah writes, notice verse 2, I have nourished and brought up children, they have rebelled against me. Verse 3, chapter 1 of Isaiah, the ox knows its owner, the donkey its master's crib, but Israel does not know, my people do not consider. Alas, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a brood of evildoers. Whoa, I mean, this was Isaiah's day. Children who are corrupters, they have forsaken the Lord, they have they have provoked to anger. The Holy One of Israel, that is, they have turned away backward. Look at verse 21. How the faithful city has become a harlot. It was full of justice, righteousness lodged in it, but now murderers. Chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. For Jerusalem stumbled and Judah is fallen, because their tongue and their doings are against the Lord. They'd been confusing good and evil. To provoke the eyes of His glory, the look on their countenance witnesses against them, and they declare their sin as Sodom. They do not hide it. Woe to their soul, for they have brought evil upon themselves. Chapter 5, verse 18. Woe to those who draw iniquity with cords of vanity. They just bring in that sin along with them. And sin as with a cart rope. They're just got it tagging along beside them or behind them. That say, let him make speed. So here are those in Israel, in Judah. Let him, God, make speed and hasten his work. You see, Isaiah had been talking about the problems, the sins of their day, and they're not going to go unpunished. They will be punished for this. Their reply, let him make speed and hasten his work, that we may see it. And let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw near and come, that we may know it. Are you kidding me? That was their attitude. Sounds like some of the things I hear on the news sometimes. And then Isaiah says, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. You know, another drink I like a whole lot, not saying I need to drink a lot of it, but you know, I guess ever since I was a little kid, I have loved Coca-Cola Classic. I mean, they tried the new Coke several years ago. It was like, that's not Coca-Cola Classic. I don't know why you did that. Not a good idea. And you can go to the Coke factory there in Atlanta, Georgia, right? And you can try all of these drinks. You all ever done that? It's pretty neat, you know, to go there. Go on a diet maybe before you go, because at the end of the thing, you can just try all of these drinks, all of these different Coke products. But you know what I always go back to? I mean, the best out there, my preference is Coca-Cola Classic. You have a burger, fries, and a Coke. What's better than that? You have a huge piece of pepperoni pizza and a Coke. What is better than that? Some of y'all are getting hungry now, aren't you? Let me just tell you. Let me tell you about my 2-liter of Coca-Cola Classic right here. Here it is, 2-liter of Coke. You know, if cursing, if that is just a slip of the tongue, then this big, is this a gallon? 1.33, why can't they just do gallons these days? I mean, you know, it's kind of like half-a-gallon ice cream is no longer a half-a-gallon ice cream. You pay for a half-a-gallon, but you get like, 8 ounces less than that. That this big thing, a Roundup, is my Coca-Cola Classic. If You've been watching TV. I mean, you know, we get sucked into TV and movies and things, especially a lot of the sitcoms. Do you know what happens, it seems like, almost every time someone says a cute lie on a sitcom? You know what's happened on the Disney Channel for years with these shows where they have one kid lying to a parent? What happens in the background? What do you hear in the background? Laughter. I'm sorry, I thought that God hated dishonesty. I thought that lying lips were an abomination to the Lord. No, it's actually really funny. Is that right? Because if so, then this is my 2-liter of Coke that we can just go drink at lunch today. Don't do that, okay? You know, if cheating your way through school, if that's just a way to get by, if using God's name in vain is not really blasphemy, it's just a mere slip of the tongue. If stealing is just borrowing, if gambling, it doesn't have any negative effects on society. Did you all know that? That gambling has no negative effects on society, no negative effects on individual souls, no negative effects on families. Nor does alcohol. Did y'all know that? Alcohol does not harm anyone. You understand the point I'm making, right? I thought that wine was a mocker, strong drink was raging, and whoever is deceived by it is unwise. You know, I thought that God gave us some good sense. That we could, you know, even if God, aren't there plenty of things in this life, if God, there are many things that God did not directly say in Scripture. Now, this is right and this is wrong, and this is right and this is wrong, and this is right and this is wrong. He's given us a number of specific things He's told us about, and He's given us a great number of principles. You know, the two principles, most of the time, all we need to decide on whether we should or should not do things, the two principles that everything really hangs on is, are you loving God by doing this, and are you loving your fellow man? Including your wife or your husband or your child or your neighbor or your enemy. Listen, if gambling is just mere governmental revenue, then I would contend this is my bottle of Coca-Cola Classic and tastes just as sweet. If drunkenness is just getting buzzed, if arrogance is just confidence, if in this time of the year especially, but it's almost like it's gotten all year round, if wearing clothing, or the lack of it, that brings all this attention to you, if that's a person's desire, to let everyone see how good you look, how pretty or handsome you are, rather than do what I thought the Bible taught, that we are to really be about the hidden person of the heart that is trying to reflect God's light in our lives, that He might receive the glory, that He might get the attention. I'm not saying that other people can't compliment you or that, you know, that doesn't feel good. I'm saying if wearing immodest clothing and being lewd and naked, if you will, if that is just being in style, then this is our bottle of Coca-Cola Classic. I mean, the devil's been selling some lies, folks. If homosexuality is merely an alternative lifestyle, I realize, well, there's all sorts of pressure today, right? All sorts of pressure on churches to cave in to biblical teaching because, hey, you know, I was watching a show the other night, a show that Jen and I have seen several times, and it seems like most of the time there's some good messages, some good family values, and some other things that are present in the show. It's called Blue Bloods. Maybe you've seen it before. And you know, one of the main characters of the show, he is kind of a patriarchal father figure who's principled, and he makes generally decisions on what's right or what's wrong, and he follows through with them even though it's not popular. So many things about that show I like. And then they had a show, basically, that had to do a lot with homosexuality, where this main character that has a lot of good qualities throughout the show. He basically said, yeah, it's time, it's time that the church, he was using that in a much broader term than the Bible states it, but the church ought to just, get with the times on. No, I'm sorry, that's not what God does. God says, this is what's good and this is what is evil. And you can be on my side, on the right side, and you can love goodness and hate evil, or you can be on the devil's side. We live in a day and time where good is being called evil and evil is being called good. I think it was one particular singer a few years ago that wrote this. Well, I don't know if she wrote her own lyrics or if she just sang them, but she said, no matter gay, straight, or bi, lesbian, or transgender life, I'm on the right track, baby. I'm on the right track. Or you are. Doesn't matter. It basically doesn't matter what you do, what you think, unless you contend that that's the wrong track, and then you're on the wrong track. If we think that two unmarried people committing sexual immorality, if that's not hideous to God, then we either don't know God, or we don't know His will, or we don't care about it. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Paul said in his day, he said that there were many who walk, of whom I have told you often and now tell you even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Christ. Now, I realize in context he may have been talking more about the Judaizing teachers of his day, but I think we can make application to today. He said to these people, whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, whose glory is actually, I inserted that word, actually, in their shame. Glory in their shame. Who set their mind on earthly things. In contrast, he says in the very next verse, Philippians chapter 3, verse 20, for our citizenship is in heaven. Oh, so if our citizenship is in heaven, then we're not going to look at things the way the world looks at things. That's right. Because we're going to know good. We're going to know what good is. We're not just going to think we know it. We can really know it because God has revealed it to us. And we can know what evil is because He's revealed that to us. And plus we know that Satan is the father of lies, who is the one trying to do people into thinking actually good is evil and evil is good. But as we conclude this lesson, let me just say this. God doesn't want us to just be able to identify good and evil. He wants us, of course, to choose the good path, the right path. The path that leads to a better life now, actually, and of course, a better life in the by and by. Cody read for us a few moments ago from Romans chapter 12. What a great passage. Paul said, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable. You see, unholiness is not acceptable. It's never been acceptable to God. That's why Jesus came to die, for our unholiness, so that we could be holy. But not so that we could go back in the way of the world and act like however we want to, but that we might conform. Oh, that's what he says, right? That we might not conform our lives to this world, but that we might be, verse 2, transformed. By what? By God? By His Word? By His people? It begins in our mind that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And so we're different than the world. We're a changed person if we become a Christian. At least we're supposed to be a changed person. And as that changed Christian, as that Christian who loves the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, who loves our neighbors as ourselves, Paul says this, let this love be without hypocrisy. Romans chapter 12, verse 9. Let love be without hypocrisy. And then he says this, abhor, hate, despise, hate evil. Don't cozy up to it. Don't pal around with it. Don't embrace it. Don't act like there's nothing wrong with it. God says, wait a second. Not only do I not want you to do all that, what fellowship has light with darkness? What fellowship has Satan with God? God is of purer eyes than to behold. He can't fellowship evil. So what's our response as Christians to evil? Number one, be able to identify. Don't get confused. Try to help our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers, our classmates. Not in a holier-than-thou attitude, but help them to see by the way you live your life and by the things that you talk about, by the teachings, what is good and what is right. That we might also come to hate the sins that we used to partake of before we became Christians, and that we might cling to what is good. You know the word that Paul uses there to cling to? It's the same word he's used elsewhere to talk about the relationship between a husband and wife as they cling to one another. It is a gluing together. Again, it's not about Christians just acting like Christians are bad. Listen, we're saved sick people. I mean, we're saved sinners. We were sick and only made well by the blood of Jesus. We're not better than anybody else. But are we to be good? Oh, most certainly. Goodness is a fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness. What about goodness? Cling to it. You know, I was weed eating a few months ago, and you ever get the weed eater wire where it's like, I mean, you think, how did that get that way? I mean, it quit coming out. You know, you're like banging the head on the thing. It quit coming out. You open it up, and y'all know I'm not much of a handyman. Jason, I think you're handier than I am, man, and that's saying something, right? What, that? Which one? You're probably a lot handier at some of these things. And Wendy's like, no, he's not. Okay. You mean, does Wendy fix a lawnmower like Jana does? Or my dad does? I was, banging on the weed eater. I come, and then I just look at that string. I guess it had been months. It had been sitting in this storage room, probably overheated in Alabama, 155-degree heat. And it's like it just melted together. Isn't that kind of how we are to be glued to God and His goodness? I mean, that's what we want to be about. On the other hand, evil and wickedness, I know it's tempting. Let me tell you, my wife doesn't even know this yet. This is so odd. I'm preaching on this lesson today, and I'm sitting down there at my desk with a cup of coffee this morning, going over my lesson for the last time. I get the most wicked text from some number, I don't even know who it is, on my phone. I thought that was so, I rarely get stuff like this. I was like, is this a joke? I can't even read to you the text. It was so repulsive. I know that sometimes wickedness can sound good, and it can look good. It can smell good, if you will. Oh, it is so appealing. We all have our weaknesses. But God says, listen, I don't want you to just be able to expose it. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11. Have fellowship, no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. Rather, expose the unfruitful works of darkness. God says, don't only be able to identify it. Don't only expose it. I want you to go so far as to hate it. whether it's sexual immorality, adultery, homosexuality. You don't hate the person, but sin, whatever it is, covetousness, filthy language, whatever it is. We want to be so enamored with our great God, so in love with Him, so close to Him and to His people, that we love Him, we love His people, we love goodness, we cling to it like a loving husband and wife cling to each other. And we hate what Satan is all about. He's about sin. He's about ruin. He's about devastation. He's about eternal destruction. May God help us to love the good and hate the evil. If you haven't begun your path, if you haven't begun your journey on the path to righteousness, it's done by recognizing that there's sin in our lives, sin that only Jesus, that Jesus and only Jesus can take care of because of His plan of salvation, that we have the opportunity to respond to through faith, confession of that faith, turning away from sin, repenting of sin, and being immersed in water for the forgiveness of sins. If you've become a Christian, you realize, you know what? I've been confusing all this good and evil. I've been making light of it. The world has gotten into my life, into my home, into my heart. I've got to make some changes. It could be that those changes might need to be made publicly. The gospel invitation of Jesus Christ, which is so merciful, so awesome, it's open today. And I can't think of a more loving body of Christians than right here at Wetumpka, who will love you and love me despite our weaknesses, in spite of our struggles with sins, and they will pray for you and me. They will help us to change, to repent as we come confessing sin in our lives. If you need to respond to God's invitation today, won't you do so as we stand and as we sing?
Number 255. I'm pressing on the outward way, new heights I'm